Leaders are readers. That's one of the many lessons I learned from former NATO commander Admiral James Stavridis. In this excerpt from our conversation, he tells me why the written word is still the fast track to success in any field. Before you forget, click subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of my tutorials and interviews. And, of course, if you enjoy it, give it a like or leave a comment. Here's the Admiral.
Admiral, our paths have crossed from time to time because I am a big fan of your books. Leader's Bookshelf was one of the first ones. That's a permanent staple on my bookshelf. Leader's Bookshelf was one of the books that introduced me to you. But I love so many of your other books. I want to get into one you wrote last year as well. But you are also someone who has cited some of my communication books in your speeches and lectures. And I appreciate that because I write books with the intention of elevating leadership skills. So when someone like yourself cites my books, that's immensely gratifying. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. And I think in so many ways, the essence of leadership is the ability to communicate and inspire. And to do that, I think you have to be not only a good speaker, but a good writer as well. As you know, something I've advocated for a long time, in order to be a better writer, your best course is to become a better reader. Because by reading good literature, reading both nonfiction and fiction, you can enhance your ability to communicate, both in writing, by the way, and verbally, as we're doing right now.
You became a voracious reader very early in your life. Your father was named the U.S. Navy attaché in Greece. So you began this lifelong journey starting at the age of 8, and you became a reader. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that journey took place and what it has meant to you in your career?
When I was 8 years old, we moved to Greece, and my father was assigned at the American Embassy. But here's the punchline. In Greece, in the mid-1960s, when I was 8 years old, there was no television. So when a typical American kid is developing that television habit, in the 60s and 70s anyway, is when they're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. In those years, I lived in a country, Greece, with no television. So every week, my mom would take me down to the English-speaking library, and I would check out books. And so every week, I'd go home with a stack of books, and they got increasingly more complex and longer. Both my parents were readers. I always lived in a house with books in it. And so it developed into a lifelong habit that continues to this day. It would be very rare for me to go through a year without reading at least 100 books. I read a book about every 2 to 3 days.
So you're reading 2 or 3 books a week, as do I. Explain to viewers, what role does reading play in a leader's ultimate success, regardless of what field they're in?
I think first and foremost, by diving into a book, particularly here, I'm going to choose fiction and historical fiction. Mm-hmm. A book of that nature can become, if you will, a simulator where you can put yourself at the center of it and say, what would I have done? Think about Stephen Pressfield's magnificent novel, Gates of Fire, about the Spartans who make the commitment, the ultimate commitment, to fight and to die at the Battle of Thermopylae. Reading that book, you can put yourself in their shoes. You can understand their motivations. You can ask yourself, would I have the courage and the commitment and the honor to undertake that mission? You learn a lot doing that. Secondly, by reading history, you gain perspective. You can look back at previous times and apply those lessons of applied history. I often pick up the works of Thucydides, the Greek famous ancient historian, and his stories of the Peloponnesian Wars between Athens and Greece. A lot of what went into my novel, 2034, came out of that particular historical period. And third and finally, policy, current events. You can pick up a book by any number of brilliant scholars, and it's not quite the same as being in a conversation with Henry Kissinger, but you're reading the words and the philosophies and the ideas that he's communicated deeply important to understand. Again, when I decided to write this book, I reread Henry Kissinger's magisterial treatment of China. His book is called On China, and it helped me immensely as I prepared to write this book and as I continue to do commentary about U.S.-Chinese relations. So there's 3 reasons, Carmen.
That reminds me of Erik Larson's books,
Yes.
like The Splendid and the Vile. I think you're fond of his books as well.
I am. I often refer particularly to one that is about pre-World War II Germany in the Garden of Beasts, and it is about the Nazi regime in Berlin. Very illuminating. He writes, as you point out, history, but his flair as a writer makes it as pleasurable as reading the greatest of novels.
Admiral, you'll appreciate this. So I interviewed Erik last year when his book on Churchill came out, The Splendid and the Vile. And so I had a conversation with Mr. Larson, and I told him, darn you, I know the ending of your books, and it's still a page turner. How do you do it? He's that good of a writer.
He is. Another one in that category is Dead Wake, which is about
that's what introduced me to him.
the sinking of the Lusitania.
You know how it ends.
You do. And on the other hand, in my mind, and I'm a naval officer and I think something of a historian, I had it in my mind that Lusitania was sunk, on a dark and stormy night in the middle of the Atlantic. It was sunk within sight of land on a sunny day. He just manages to grab details and bring them into the books just brilliantly.
I think it was President Truman who said, not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. I think I would also add to that, based on my experience, leaders who read a lot of books, both fiction and nonfiction and historical, are more interesting communicators. They're innovators, they're pioneers. They bring a range of experiences to their teams and to their communication. And I'm thinking everyone from Steve Jobs to Jeff Bezos, who is a voracious reader and recommends books to his leadership team. Would you agree that the world's most innovative and inspiring entrepreneurs and leaders tend to read more than average?
Oh, indeed. And I can tell you with direct knowledge, within the military profession, by the time someone has ascended to 4-star rank as a full general or admiral, it is very rare to encounter somebody at that level who is not a profoundly deep reader.